気配を消すくらいなんでもないし、このくらい余裕は。
お前バカ。
誰です？
きれ。
ブラッド。いや、これは。
お前の着替えをちょいと覗くかってな。
いや、僕はやめるって。
He was so down bad that when he died, he prayed for the goddess to give him another chance at life to hopefully lose his virginity. Thankfully, the goddess answered his prayers out of pity, but on one condition: he must become her proxy to one day defeat the High King who rules over the world. Episode 1. Long ago, in the beginning of the world, the mana that encased the first was too strong, causing there to be gods. Here the gods spawned on Earth and delegated all of the mana to the humans that walk on this Earth. This takes us back to the present, where an old, ugly man tells a young boy about the world. This mana can be used to make different powers, and it is called the Words of Creation. By utilizing the Words of Creation, you can create various things, including fire. This was the first time our protagonist learned of mana, and was also when his journey to becoming the strongest began. Once his class with the old man is over, he explores the various statues of the gods to learn more about them. As he explores, he finds a statue of a god that piques his interest. A blonde woman notices this and approaches the young boy, asking him if he wants to learn more about this god. She explains this god as Gracefiel, the mother of earth and matter. With this god being the most revered of all the gods, the blonde woman, Mary, worships it herself. While she talks with the young boy, a skeleton man named Blood emerges with a boar in hand. He informs our protagonist, Will, that he captured it in order to give him a good meal tonight. While he eats, Blood informs him that soon he is coming of age to start learning how to hunt and take one's life. When the others hear this, they protest Blood's recommendation, informing him he is way too young to start hunting. The old geezer tries to keep Will to himself, claiming he is far too talented to be a hunter. Although Will is treated well, he's unsure of why he is surrounded by these people, or who they really are. He wonders why all of them are undead, knowing there must be some secret they are hiding. Little do they know, however, Will is keeping a secret of his own. In his previous life, he was your typical 9-5 worker that got absolutely no play. When he first awoke in this new world, he was scared of the others at first, but soon recognized them as his companions. Half a year after he first spawned into this world, he learned how to walk, making him progress much faster than many others. On top of this, he learned the language in only half a year, allowing him to be taken outside. With him being unsure of the world he is in when he was first taken outside, he realizes how lucky he really got. The beautiful countryside of ruins, Will was brought to tears at the thought of getting spawned into a new world. He realized that this was his second chance to finally become something and live how he wants. Flash forward to the present, and Will spends his days training alongside his companions. Today, he learned the way of the sword from Blood, who showed no mercy on him despite his age. Before we continue, let's take a moment to answer the question of the day. How many hours of anime have you watched? Comment down below for a chance to be shouted out in the next video. Now back to the recap. Blood's main teaching was to grow strong muscles, making Will wonder why he needs them when blood is all bones. He then moves on to training with the old man, who excels in magic. Although he struggled at first, thanks to the old geezer's guidance, Will is able to shape his magic easily. The old geezer informs him that, at his age, nobody else can use magic as proficient as he can. This makes him call Will a prodigy, telling him if he continues to train, he will become stronger than himself. He tells Will if he wants to continue learning from him, however, he needs to pay up and show he cares about learning from him. Will, having lived with him his whole life, has no money, making him wonder what the geezer wants. Later that night, he learns from Mary about the dangers within the world. With there being demons all over Earth and a god of undead named Stagnate, the dangers are immense. Mary explains that Stagnate has control over them as well, contracting them to continue surviving. She informs him that she was also once a human who contracted with this god. After this, days go by, and eventually, Will tries to take his first life despite it only being an animal. With him coming from a world of peace, however, he is unable to finish off the bird, causing Blood to give him some advice. He advises him that he doesn't need to be ready to kill just yet. If he wants to survive, he'll need to start killing. He tells Will, who is close to being 8 years old, that he should be ready to decide his future now. Informs him that with all the training he has done, he'd be able to handle someone like him. Blood then charges him, but Will is too fast with his magic, restraining Blood. Blood, however, is much stronger than he let on, so he breaks free easily and overpowers overpowers Will. Following this, they sit down to discuss his skills, where they tell Will that if he wants to become stronger, he needs to have real battle experience. Blood tells Will that the senile old man, Gus, was a famous magician when he was still alive. Gus then reminds Blood that he was also a famous warrior when he was human, urging him not to give him so much praise. Gus then explains that, although they are all strong, they need to properly teach Will how to become strong. This makes Blood feel like he should be the primary teacher of Will. After this happens, Gus apologizes to Will for not making him strong enough to deal with a meathead like Blood. Later that night, Blood and Will walk together to talk about his future. Blood explains that although he is getting older, he still can't reveal all of their secrets. He tells him that one day, if he continues training, he will be a master in every aspect of the world. With all three of them teaching their own things, Will thinks highly of Mary's skills as well. They're teaching him everything there is to know about the world. There is one thing that bugs him. When she goes to pray to her god, he isn't allowed within the temple for any reason. Later that night, after he finishes his tasks, he goes back inside to find Mary bringing bread out from the temple's room. This makes him question what's going on, so he decides to venture into the temple to see what's going on. He finds Mary being encased in a mana that is dangerous for him to touch. Because of his efforts to try and help her, he ended up getting burned all over his arms, causing him to be bedridden. Although he acted out of line and tried to learn things he wasn't, the undead aren't mad at Will at all. They tell him that although he is curious, he needs to listen to them so that he doesn't get injured again. Gus then explains to him that the bread Mary always brings is from the goddess of earth as a reward for her offering up herself. Mary informs him that because she formed a contract with the god of death, she is punished daily by her god. Despite all of this, however, Mary still plans on sacrificing herself so that she can get the bread Will likes, showing she truly cares for him. Episode 2. Later that week, Gus informs Will that the gods are currently in a large-scale war. With each god having their own differences, they are unable to rule in peace. This makes Will question if these stories are true, having never seen or witnessed any actions of a god. Gus then explains the two main gods who are fighting, informing him that because the good and bad gods are, even the balance is kept. He also mentions that gods have different senses of severity, telling him they don't treat human lives as good as he does. The following week, Will practices praying to the gods to hopefully find some new sort of power hidden within him. Once 5 days passed, Mary enters the room and tells him his prayer should be over now. It is revealed that Will is now 13 years old and is recovering his arm slowly. Although Mary is able to heal it instantly, he decided to bear with the pain to keep as a battle scar. Gus's lessons as well have gotten much harder, making him pack as much knowledge as he can. He feels like Gus is pushing him as hard as he can to try and get him to give up. When he goes to train with Blood, he is given a low-ranked skeleton to fight as his first real fight. Although he is scared at first, he is easily able to defeat the skeleton with a single strike once he regains his senses. Once Blood sees this, he is stunned, but refuses to reveal this to him, thinking he might get overconfident if he does. He then asks him if he thinks he's a genius so much, then he should take on a real challenge. Blood then guides Will into the ruined city to head deeper into the tunnels. As they walk through the tunnel, Blood informs him that this used to be where dwarfs lived. Eventually he stops and tells him that his mission is to escape from the tunnel, dropping the light and disappearing. This makes Will wonder what kind of practice he is giving him, but soon realizes when some monsters emerge. Following this, he tried to venture throughout the tunnel, but eventually began to realize how lonely it is without his companions. Regardless, he continues forward, knowing if he gives up here, he won't ever become someone special. Will wants to make the others proud for training him during the past 13 years. He then encounters an undead stronger than any he has fought before. Although he is scared to fight it at first, when he thinks of what Blood would do, he prepares to attack. The monster gets a couple strikes in, but Will knows that it doesn't compare to Blood. Because of this, he confidently strikes the monster on the head and shatters its skull. In the process, he ends up destroying his weapon, but he soon finds another one sitting on the floor. Upon inspection, he learns it's a dwarf-made weapon, so he decides to use it for the remainder of the time. Before he exits the dungeon, he starts to wonder more about his life. He questions if there are any other humans in this world, and who could possibly be his mother. His thought is soon interrupted, however, when Gus appears before him. He tries to talk with Gus, but gets no response, making him confused. Then suddenly Gus uses magic to summon a golem, forcing Will on the retreat. He looks at Gus, wondering what's going on, but knows he has to fight if he wants to survive. With his thoughts regrouped, he strikes the golem and defeats it, but Gus continues with his onslaught of attacks. This forces Will to continuously run away, giving him not a single chance to fight back. Then Gus uses a triple cast spell, forcing him onto the ground. He thinks this is the end, but knows if he gives up here, then he will definitely die. Because of this, he charges Gus, but is unable to land a fatal blow on him. He calls Gus his grandfather and asks him why he is fighting him. He tells him that he will accept his fate, but he wants to know the reason. He then realizes that Gus has been going easy on him this entire time, knowing if he wanted he could encase the entire area in flames. This brings him to tears, wondering why Gus is putting him through all of this. He tells Gus that if he really needs to, then he can kill, but he is soon interrupted when Gus starts laughing. He tells him that this was all just a lesson, congratulating him on the efforts he has put in. They then head out of the tunnel with Will still unsure what he should do with his future. Once he gets back, all of his companions compliment him on the weapon he acquired, informing him it is a well-made piece. Eventually, after some training, Will learned how to shapeshift the weapon to be his own. Because he gained this strength, he would go back to the tunnel multiple times to gain more experience. After this, he goes to his usual lesson with Gus, but he learns that he has a different task today. He brings him into a room with a load of money and informs him that today they will be gambling. Will tries to deny the game, but when they ridicule him for being scared, he is forced to join in. Will ends up losing all of his money, causing Mary to enter the room angrily, asking how they could take a child's funds away. Following these events, Gus takes Will to a room where he plans on doing his coming-of-age ceremony. With Blood being his opponent in battle to prove his worth, Gus decides to ask him if he would consider losing on purpose. This only angers Will, him questioning Gus why he must always be left out of what's going on. Like always, however, Gus tells him that he can't tell him the reasoning for his request. With his mind all jumbled around, he goes to look at the gods, where Mary informs him he should pick one of the strongest ones. With each god having their own strengths, they tell him that he should swear his loyalty to whatever god he feels most connected to. Episode 3. Today Will finds himself training until he is approached by Blood, offering a drink. He informs him by combining honey and grapes he made his own type of wine. This makes Will worried about what Mary will say, but Blood tells him it's a drink between men. Despite Blood being only bones, the alcohol somehow disappears when it goes through his jaw. After they finish drinking, they head back to the house thinking nothing is up with them as they slur their words. Will seems to be unable to handle his liquor, so he stumbles around the place. They then arrive at Mary's room to peep on her changing, but he ends up tripping and falling. This exposes two, and with Blood having drank, he exposes their plans thoroughly. He wakes up the next day with a sore cheek, wondering how he ended up falling for Blood's schemes last night. Finally, the day arrives where Will is to face off against Blood and thus leave the temple. As he trains, Mary approaches him and asks if he knows which god he plans on making an oath to. Will tells her that he knows already and that he will surely win in his duel. He then heads to the battlefield, but Gus is nowhere to be seen. He thinks that he just skipped out on the fight, so he faces Blood, who explains the rules. With no magic being allowed and it being a battle to the death, he is forced to get serious. Will then charges Blood, hoping to get an early lead, but he is stopped in his tracks. Blood then unleashes a ton of attacks, forcing Will on the retreat. Somehow he defends against these attacks and lands a strike back on him. This evens the match, so Will takes the chance to regroup. He decides on a plan and charges Blood, using his experience in his battles over the years to take advantage of a weak spot. He ends up knocking Blood down, but as he tries to deal the final blow, he ends up getting pushed back. With each side displaying amazing skills, the battle ends with each side satisfied. Mary then approaches and tells Blood to stop using such a tricky technique, catching his opponent's sword in his ribcage. She reveals he was doing this even when he was alive, and the two start arguing. Following this, Blood talks with Will, telling him he passes his test. He also tells him that he has grown much stronger over time, earning his respect. Once he hears this, Will calls Blood and Mary his parents, making them blush. They tell him that although they raised him, it's about time that he goes off on his own. Blood then presents him with a weapon of his own, informing him it's something called an overeater. Overeaters are the strongest of weapons that are able to deal fatal blows on even the gods' proxies. He also tells him that when a human swings that sword, he steals his life force, making him stronger in the process. Because of this, he doesn't want Will to use the sword too much, because he is afraid he will become dependent on it. This makes him wonder if he really is worthy of such a weapon, but is assured when Blood tells him more about it. He tells Will that he is finally ready to explain their full stories and past. He explains that the ruined city before them was once ruled by someone named the High King. 200 years ago, the High King led an army of demons that invaded the world. With him leading these demons, they all gave up themselves to the High King, treating him as if he was a god. This led to mass destruction around the world, causing most of the cities to be completely destroyed. Because of these events, even Blood doesn't know what most cities looked like before the war. The reason he was able to do all of this was because he could turn his own blood into demons. With this power, magic and arrows never did any damage, causing the Overeater to be created. Even with the creation of the Overeater, the High King continued his reign because nobody was a match for him. This was until one day when Gus left in order to lead an army to fight against the High King. Will realizes that Gus's plan all along was to train him to be the perfect fighter to deal with the High King if he ever comes back again one day. He assumes that Gus succeeded in defeating the High King, but Mary informs him that they never did end up defeating the High King. Although they broke through his first form, the High King turned into an even stronger enemy which ripped apart all of Gus's army. This explains why Blood and the others became undeads. On top of this, Gus ended up placing a seal on the High King that trapped him within the earth. Mary blames their loss on herself, telling him that because they failed to defeat him and were forced to seal him, he ended up becoming a god's proxy. Although he was still sealed, the three of them ended up dying, causing Stagnate, the undead god, to offer them a second chance. He told the three that if they become undead, then he will get rid of all the demons within the city. They explained that after they made the deal with the god, they each lost the part of their body they loved the most. Because of all of this, the three ended up becoming the highest rank undead, and also the protectors of the world, keeping the seal sealed. They had spent every day protecting this seal until Will finally emerged on their world. Although they were hesitant to take Will in at first, Mary and Blood were able to convince Gus to look after him. This steels Will's resolve, knowing he needs to become stronger so that one day he can fix the city and bring back a family of his own. After they tell him this, they hug him and tell him goodbye for the final time. Once they do, the sky begins to erupt, causing a deity to descend upon the world. He tells Blood and Mary it's time for them to leave the world in order to let Will take over. The deity then tries to go and steal their souls, but Gus gets in between the deity's advances. Episode 4. Gus begins his counterstrike by sending in a large-scale magical binding spell. With each side having their own magic, the sides seem even until Gus uses a quad-cast magical spell. He then uses another spell to push the deity back into oblivion. Once the fight ends, Gus approaches Will, acting like it wasn't a big deal. This makes Will realize just how special his family is, wishing he never has to leave them. And just as he thinks it's over, Gus gets sliced in half by the deity, showing he isn't finished just yet. He reemerges and informs Will that because he split his body into two, he was able to survive. Gus then reveals that the man before them is Stagnate, the god of the undead. Once he finishes off Gus, he approaches Will, thanking him for all of his hard work over the years. He informs Will that because he is of age, he will take the souls of the three heroes. This makes Will wonder why he was reborn in the first place. Stagnate informing him he has lived just for this moment. He then invites Will to join his side, hoping with his powers he will assist him like the heroes did. Before he gets a response, he leaves, telling Will he expects him to give him an answer before he dies. Following this, Will brings his family back into their old temple, where he apologizes to them one final time. This makes Will realize that the time Gus was fighting him was because he was unsure if he should continue letting Will live. All of this information seems too much for Will to handle, so he falls to the ground to grovel. He wishes that he wasn't reborn, thinking that this life isn't any better than his virgin life in Japan. He goes to sleep that night depressed, but wakes up to find all of his family overlooking him. They tell him that he shouldn't be sorry, then avoid Stagnate for long enough. Three of them continue to talk normally as if they aren't gone, urging Will to leave the temple now that he is old enough. Instead of relieving him, these efforts make Will even more sad, him finally revealing he reincarnated. He informs them that in his last life, he was a worthless worker stuck in the rat race. He felt pathetic when he first came into this world, so he got stronger for himself. This makes him think that it's all his fault that they died, but Mary has other plans. She slaps him and tells him that he is better than anyone else in this world, hoping to give him the push he needs. Although Will is hesitant at first, he finally realizes that his life with the three heroes was only the start. He knows that he needs to fulfill their wish, so he asks them to allow him to protect them. After this happens, he heads inside of the temple one last time to pray for one of the gods' blessings. Once this is finished, he heads outside to meet up with Stagnate. He tells him that he doesn't plan on giving him anything of his, informing him he is ready to fight. Instead of making him angry, this makes him happy, so he tells Will he will play along with his game. Before he does, he reminds Will that he is a god, asking if he is up for the challenge. Once he says this, he disappears and summons an army of low-level undead. Will doesn't falter, however, swinging his spear around and making quick work of anyone in his path. He then sees one of the undead casting a spell, so he rushes it, finding Stagnate in the process. Stagnate simply summons in 100 more, but Will doesn't back down, causing him to be intrigued. Stagnate tells him he recognizes his strength, so he wants him to join him in his undead army as a general. He offers a peaceful life alongside his parents, asking if he wants to live with them forever. Stagnate continues, trying to convince him by saying he will reform the word, which is followed by him offering the contract. He offers him a sample of his blood, to which Will walks forward to, like he will accept. Before he does grab the cup, however, he pulls out his sword and slices through the chest of Stigante. With this sword holding immense power, he lands a fatal blow on him, forcing Stagnate to pull out a dirty trick. He wraps Will with a snack and knocks him out from the venom. When Will wakes up, he finds himself in an endless pit, making him wonder if he died for real this time. For some reason, he recognizes this area, so he looks around, finding the goddess of light. He finally remembers last time he was here, walking alongside the goddess for what seemed like an eternity. The goddess then asks him a question, speaking for the first time. She asks him why he denied Stagnate's offer, knowing it could grant him anything he wished for. Will reveals that because this is his second life, he knows if he took his offer and died, he wouldn't really be living. He knows that because he was granted another life, he was able to enjoy his life with his family. Because of this, he refuses to die and halt his chances to grow stronger. With this being said, Will prays to the goddess, asking for another chance at life. Upon seeing his resolve, the goddess decides that she will take him up on his request and grant his wish. She tells him to wake up and make an oath to her, promising she will be his guardian deity. He then gets up to find himself in the exact situation as before, but this time he makes sure to give his oath to the goddess. Once he does, he becomes encased in a divine fire and becomes ready to fight against Stagnate. He then says his oath, vowing his life to fight alongside Gracefeel, the goddess of light. With this newfound power, he wipes out every one of the undead soldiers, striking fear into Stagnate. Once he sees this power, he runs off, leaving Will unsure of when he will re-emerge. Episode 5. Will eventually realizes that Stagnate won't re-emerge, but rather he is after Blood and Mary. He runs as fast he can to the temple, but once he arrives, he realizes it's too late. He finds Stagnate holding Gus hostage with the other two on the floor, unable to move. As Will rushes towards him, he realizes that even with the goddess's blessing, he is too weak to stop him. To his surprise, before he reaches them, a new goddess emerges, knocking Stagnate back. This makes her realize that despite her forming a pact with Stagnate and betraying her oath, her goddess had always forgiven her. After this happens, Will rushes towards his companions, throwing a spell that will put their souls to rest. Stagnate is forced to intercept it, wanting to continue using them for his own benefits, but this only hurts him. This creates an opening where Will is able to land a fatal strike on Stagante. He doesn't stop here, however, slashing him from side to side, making him seem more like a low-level monster than a god. To finish him off, Will calls him a low-level villain, forcing him back into oblivion. Will informs him that this isn't the end, telling him that he will hunt him down into the depths of hell. Once he finishes all of this, he falls to the ground, exhausted. He realizes if he hadn't been trained as hard as he was all these years, he wouldn't have stood a chance against Stagnate. With the battle being over for now, his family comes to congratulate him. They thank him for his efforts, knowing that they would be slaves to Stagnate without him. The men then tell him it's time they drink to celebrate, and finally Mary allows it. As Blood and Mary try to get up to celebrate, their legs give in. They realize that because they resisted Stagnate's powers, they will gradually start to fade away. Blood informs Will of this, hoping he will continue to walk down his righteous path. They then tell him that no matter what he does, they will continue to be his parents. These words allow him to see his parents' true faces, finally making him see their human selves. Gus then appears and pours everyone up a drink, celebrating even though Blood and Mary can't move. Later that night, Mary and Blood's souls end up vanishing, but are guided by Gracefeel. With Will knowing they are in a better place, he digs each grave to say his final goodbyes. Right before he leaves, Gus emerges, asking him if it's finally time he heads out. Will asks him why he didn't die as well, wondering how the oldest of them is still alive. Gus dodges the question, calling Will a sleazy little child. He shows that although he thinks of Will this way, he still cares for him, throwing a bag of money. With Gus being a money worshipper, Will realizes how important of a gift this is. He thinks this is Gus's final goodbye, but he informs him that he still has another 10 years. Gus tells him that he still needs to guard the High King's seal to ensure that Will has enough time to prepare for the final battle. With this, Will walks to the temple one final time to grab his things and embark on a new journey. Once he does, he heads out, walking around with Gus to find where to go. Gus then tells him if he plans on adventuring the world, he needs a last name, so he names him William Merryblood. By combining his parents' last names, he will always remember them. Episode 6. Since this day, Will runs around the world, defeating demons and monsters as he progresses. Eventually, he stumbles upon the first new building since he has left. As he gets to this building, it starts raining, making Will wonder if there are any other humans in this world. He knows that 200 years ago, there was a massive war that caused many people to die. While he thinks about this, he continues looking around the world until he stumbles upon another ruined city. He hopes that someone will be residing within it. At first glance, he is completely alone. That night, he prays to his goddess, hoping that she will continue to bless him. Following this, he continues to look around town until he stumbles upon a destroyed bridge. Because of this, he is forced to camp out on the other side of the river that night. While eating dinner, he realizes that he is starting to run out of food. He wishes to encounter human civilization soon, being lonely since he left his temple. He assumes if he continues to follow the river, he will find a civilization. He finds something else instead. A boar charges at him, but impaled in it is an arrow, making him wonder if there is someone else nearby. As he thinks of this, a hunter emerges, making Will wonder if he needs to fight. He thinks of what to say to the hunter, but eventually recognizes her emblem, revealing he is an elf. Because of this, he speaks Elven to the man, revealing he isn't an enemy. The man then tells Will that the boar is his, informing him he attacked it first. Will doesn't falter, however, telling him that he was the one who killed it. This angers the elf, so he decides to negotiate with Will, splitting the boar. Once he finishes butchering the boar, he prays to his goddess, asking her to take his life someplace better. They then begin cooking up the boar, becoming more acquainted as they eat. Once they finish eating, Will asks the elf for help finding where to go. He tells him that he is from a foreign land and that he is lost in these woods. Once he hears this, the elf informs him that if he continues up the river, he will find a civilization in 2 days. Before the elf runs off, however, he asks him to go to his village, but the elf denies his request. He then summons in fairies to guide him, revealing this man isn't just any elf. Because of this, he introduces himself to finally learn that the elf's name is Minel. With Will being alone again, he wonders if he will continue to encounter people like him. He questions what the town will be like as he tries to get some sleep. In the middle of the night, however, he gets a divine revelation from his goddess, telling him there is a tragedy soon to happen. Because of this, he rushes towards the elf village, hoping he can make it in time before there is any destruction. Once he arrives, everything looks normal, so he approaches only to find 2 men walking towards him. Then suddenly an arrow flies in the men's way, forcing Will to reveal himself. Upon inspecting the arrow, he realizes that Minel isn't the one in trouble, but rather he is the one attacking. With the 2 now being enemies, they exchange attacks, but neither side lets up. Will uses his superior magic he learned from Gus to completely eliminate any magic thrown at him. He then charges Melon, making him realize he is no match for Will. After subduing him, he captures the rest of the perpetrators, causing the town to erupt in chaos. They question what to do with the perpetrators while Will meets with the town's leader. He tells Will of where their town is, lying in the Fertile Kingdom. Because of how south it is from the capital, the kingdom doesn't interfere in their issues at all, forcing the town to survive on its own. Will then asks what they will do to the people who attacked him. The town leader explains that with them being from a neighboring town, it is hard to do anything bad to them. He then guides Will to the village's old chief, who thanks Will for his efforts. Will tells him it's all thanks to his goddess, asking him to praise her rather than himself. The geezer then invites Will to stay in the village for a little while, giving the decision of what to do with the enemies in his hands. Will decides to question the men only to learn that they attacked them for their own survival. With their town being overrun by demons and a majority of the village dead, they had no choice but to steal. Melon tells the others that he led this attack, so he should be the only one who is punished. The chief has other plans, informing them because they all attacked, he has no choice but to hang them. Will then remembers the sayings his family told him in the past, making him want to save the enemies. Because of this, he intrudes on the conversation and asks them if he can pay for their atonement. He pulls out a large sum of gold coins, making the village chief wonder why he would go so far to save these men. Will explains that because his family suffered from the demons, he empathizes with them. He urges them to let him pay for their crimes so he can go and deal with the demons overrunning their village. With Will's good nature shining through, they accept his proposal, leaving Will to head to their village. Before leaving, he heals all of the injured, making Milan wonder what his motives are. Will then asks him to help him defeat the demons in his village, sparking a friendship between the two.